for 12. So as soon as they come, I'll take a break from class so that I could start the generator.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. How many of you were in class last week?
I noticed 5.
Okay. So.
But the mail was sent to 7.
All right. Okay, I think there are some people who have done the class before that were registered by error. Hello, Vicky. Can you hear us? Hello. Okay, let me unmute you here. Hello, can you hear
sir?
How are you?
I'm good, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right. Where did we stop your last week? We did the history of hermeneutics, isn't it?
Yes, we did, sir.
Okay. So, we are starting from Unit 3, and I believe we'll be able to try 3 and 4. I'm going to stop the class about 10 minutes to the end because I'm having another class by 6 o'clock, so that I'll need to log in. I need time to log in and find it. Okay, another person is coming in. Hello, Chimdi, how are you? Hello.
Hello, sir.
Hello, sir.
I'm trying to talk to the new entrant. Mr. Amba is just coming in.
Okay.
Hello, Mr. Amba, how are you? Okay, maybe his microphone is not working yet. Okay, I think it's stuck now. All right, let me unmute him. Can you hear us, Mr. Amba?
Good evening, sir.
How are you? Good evening. Okay.
I'm fine, sir.
You are set for us now. Okay. I don't mind the darkness I find myself. I don't have light right now.
Yes, sir.
My generator and then stop it to put in fuel. So I send somebody for fuel. So as soon as the person comes back, I'll fill in the tank and then I'll put the generator and we'll continue.
Okay, sir.
When it comes, I have to take a break. It won't take more than 5 minutes by God's grace. We are good. We are starting today with what we call the historical contextual analysis. Just come up there. Okay, here we are. Now, one of the basic in exegesis is we believe that whatever is written within a context, isn't it? And I know that many of you will have been hearing people, especially in Nigeria, politicians, say the press quoted out of context.
Yes, sir.
In that phrase. Yeah. The issue is that it's true. Whenever you take a statement of its context, you can give that statement even the meaning that the person who gave the statement did not intend. All right. Let's begin by an introduction to the historical, cultural, and contextual analysis. Now, the crucial role of historical, cultural, and contextual analysis in hermeneutics is well articulated by who said that the meaning of the text cannot be interpreted with any degree of certainty without historical, cultural, and contextual analysis. In other words, unless you do the historical, cultural, and contextual analysis of a passage, you cannot interpret the passage correctly. That's there. Now, historical, cultural, and contextual analysis are of two types. We talk about the general context, we talk about the specific context. Now, when we are doing this, we need to ask questions like, what is the general historical milieu of the passage? What is the historical cultural context? What is the purpose of the book? And what is the immediate context of the passage? So these are the first questions we will deal with now. In determining the general historical cultural context of a book, you need to ascertain the historical situation facing the writer and the audience. This includes the political. Did you not take this last week? Hello? Did we take this aspect last week? I think we
No, sir.
We did it. Okay.
No, sir. No.
All right. I'm going to pause recording now, so just hold on. All right. So now let's look at one of the things. One of the practical things. When you're asking that your husband should take another wife, actually cultural evil. It is the law at that time that if a woman is not able to have children, she can give her maid to the husband. And legally, all the children that the maid has will actually be regarded as woman's children. So the truth is that if Sarah have ended up not having any child, Ishmael will have been the legal heir. Do you understand that?
Yes, sir.
Now, to help you with this kind of analysis, you need to consult books on Bible geography, on Bible history, on the culture of biblical times. Now, I gave 2 examples. If you can, it can give you a lot of history or analysis of the cultural area. Now, the next thing is determining the historical cultural context of a book. Now, to do this, you have to ask the following questions. Who is the author of this book? What was the author's spiritual background and experience? Who is the recipient? Who is or who are the recipient of the books? What is or what are the peculiar situations of the recipient? What was the author's intention or purpose of writing the book? Now, information about author and recipient can be discovered from what we call internal and external data. Now, let me explain that. Internal data refers to evidences that can be taken from the Bible book itself, while external data refer to evidences from other sources apart from the Bible. So these usually include materials written by early church fathers and other authors who are not even Christian, if what they are writing is relevant. In your study of this data, you must be careful not to be guided by prejudices. It is also important for you to know that you may have evidences that may not give you any conclusive evidence, even both your internal and external data. An example of such is the book of Hebrews. Firstly, the book, unlike any other epistle, has no autograph. What do we mean by this? The author did not mention his name from the beginning. 2, it did not follow the Hellenistic epistolary structure. So, 3, most early church fathers did not agree that the book was written by Paul. Are you seeing what I am saying?
Yes, sir.
As of today, most New Testament scholars will tell you that Paul did not write that book, even though church tradition has ascribed it to Paul. Now, I also give examples here from books like Psalms and Proverbs that are traditionally ascribed to David and Solomon. Yet, you have passages in those books that show you that it is not written by David or Solomon. Then you now come to the issue of the purpose of writing. How do you determine the purpose for which the author of a book is writing? Number one, the author can give an explicit statement. An example of this is found in Luke chapter 1, verse 1 to 4, and John chapter 20, verse 31. Most of us are familiar with Luke 1. And from here, Luke is saying that I am writing these things so that you can know the truth. Then John said, I am writing these things so that you can believe that Jesus is the Christ. The second way to look for the purpose of the author is to look for what we call the hortatory or parenthetical aspect of the book. In other words, what are the exhortations that is coming from that book? For example, Jude verse 3 contains the author's exhortation. So while I was making effort to do this, I felt the necessity to write to you to contend earnestly for the sake for the faith once and for all handed down to the saints. Now, from this exhortation, it is clear that the purpose of the writer is to encourage believers to keep the only true faith in the face of heresy. At times, linker words like therefore will be a link. For example, in 1 Thessalonians 5:6, Paul said, so then, let us not sleep as others do. In other words, the key purpose for writing that epistle is for Christians to be vigilant for the parousia. Now, the third way to locate the purpose of a book is to examine the issues that are emphasized and sometimes the issues that are omitted. Now, you need to know that this is true of all historical books because there is no way a writer can write everything that has happened. So he ends up picking those events that will help him to achieve his purpose. Now, the next step is to determine the immediate context of a passage. How do you determine the immediate context of a passage? The first step is to determine the immediate context is to pick up the major block of materials and determine how they fit together in a whole. Now, this is why we always say that it's better for people to use study Bibles. Because most of the time, you will see them that they are written in paragraphs. So most of the time, that tells you that that paragraph is the context of that particular, the immediate context of that particular block. The second step is to discover the contribution of the passage to the author's flow of arguments. So in other words, you will relate the passage you are studying to the passage before and after it, so that you'll be able to have a kind of logical connection between the three passages. The third thing you need to do is to determine the author's perspective. Two major perspectives exist. The author can speak as God's spokesman, and the author can also speak as himself. And these two are important when you are doing your analysis. Number 4, you need to determine the focus of your passage. Now, doing this will help you to separate the main lesson being taught from incidentals. Now, let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 12, where Paul used body metaphor to discuss membership of Christians in the church. Now, I have heard preachers preaching that some Christians are like artificial teeth, still not mentioned by Paul. But what Paul is trying to say here is to talk about the variety of membership in the church and just nothing more than that. Number 5, you need to determine who is being addressed in the passage that you are interpreting. Now, these statements come out of place in an age where people love to sing Abraham's blessings are mine. Let me tell you, there is a joke here that there's a young man who likes to open Bible and pick passages for himself for the day. So the one day he now opened Matthew 27:5, which says, and he went away and hanged himself. Now he heard that God cannot give him that message for the day. He now opened the Bible the second time and he opened to Luke 10:37, which says, go and do likewise. He said, no, let me open it the third time. He now opened 13:27, which says, what you do quickly. Now, this is just a joke, but what we are trying to say, you must determine who is being addressed in the passage that you are interpreting. And for you to arrive to the message of the passage, you have to identify who is speaking, what instruction is that person giving. Is that instruction normative or descriptive? And to whom was the instruction directed? Now, if you are, especially when you are interpreting the book of Acts, you have a lot of work to do in that regard. Yeah. Let me look at an example here. If you read the book of Acts very well, you discover that even the early church was meeting on Saturday and on Sunday. Have you ever noticed that? They meet on Saturday in keeping with the Jewish Sabbath tradition, but they meet on Sunday in commemoration of the resurrection of Jesus Christ on a Sunday. But today, some people will say that any church that is having service on Sunday has deviated from scriptural injunction. Says Sabbath is what the scripture asks us to keep. Now, enough of that about contest. Do we have any question coming from anybody? If you have a question, just let me know. Or I should go on to lexical syntactical analysis.
You can go on, sir.
Go on, sir.
Okay. All right. Now, lexical analysis has to do with the words that are used. Syntactical analysis has to do with the combination of the words. So, when we talk about lexical syntactical analysis, we are actually taking care of the use of words as the author has produced the text. Lexical syntactical analysis helps you to identify how an author has used his word. Now, remember that a word can be used literally or figuratively or symbolically. And
Yes,
if you don't interpret the word as the author has used it, then there's going to be a misinterpretation. Now, let us take a look of the word flesh. The word flesh in the New Testament has 3 different meanings. For example, it could refer to our body as human beings. And you find this example in John chapter 1, verse 14, which says, and the word became flesh. 2, It could also mean the fallen human nature, as in Galatians 5:16, where Paul says, walk by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desire of the flesh. At that time, the word flesh is not meaning our physical human body. Then the number 3, it also means outward ceremonial religion. And the example is Galatians chapter 3, verse 3, where Paul said, are you so foolish? Having begun by the Spirit, are you now being perfected by the flesh? And if you read Galatians very well, by the flesh in that place, Paul means the Jewish observance of circumcision. So, you see, it's very important for us to understand how a word is used in the passage before you draw an interpretation of that passage. Now, there are 7 steps in this, and these are the steps. 1, identify the general literal form. What do we mean? What kind of John of the Bible are you dealing with? You know, we talk about John in Unit 1. If it is a prose, poetry, if it is a prose, you cannot interpret prose the way you interpret poetry. Because in poetry, words are usually used figuratively. But in prose, words are usually literal. So you must identify this passage, what kind of John it is. Then 2, you must trace the development of the author's theme. Now, this step is important for 2 reasons. The context can determine the meaning of a word. We will come across this severally as we go through this course. If a word is taken out of context, the danger is we will be overwhelmed and you will lose the meaning, the primary meaning that the author intends. Number 3, you must watch out for the natural division of the text. Now, we need to be careful here because we must remember that the Bible, even though we have the Bible today in chapters and verses, the Bible originally did not come to us in chapters and verses. Do you get that?
Yes, sir.
The current
Yes,
division
sir.
of the Bible to chapters and verses we have today was made by Archbishop Stephen Langton in the 13th century. Now, why are we saying this? You will discover that there are times that even the sentences in the Bible, in your paragraph, seems abrupt. So you will know that there is a problem from somewhere. Now, let us look at the example I have used here. In Revelation chapter 12, in Revised Standard Version, Revelation chapter 12 ends with the sentence, and he stood on the sand of the sea. But if you look at King James Version, chapter 13 opens with the sentence, and he stood on the sand of the sea. Now, you will now ask, why did the Revised Standard Version put that verse in end of chapter 12? Why did King James Version put it at the beginning of chapter 13? You can take your Bible and examine this. I hope all of you have more than 2 versions of the Bible so that we can always do this comparative analysis.
Yes, sir.
Now, another thing you need to do is to identify words that are connecting paragraphs and sentences. Connecting words can be identified as words that are used to connect ideas within the discourse. These include conjunctions, prepositions, and relative pronouns. Where you come across words such as therefore, you have to know that that word is linking that passage with the passage before it. An example is Ephesians chapter 6, verse 13, which says, therefore, take upon take upon yourself the full armor of God, so that you may be able to resist. So, the word therefore is a link between Ephesians chapter 6, verse 10 to the rest of the passage. So it just tells you that what has been discussed theoretically to that point is now being applied practically. Now, finally, we come to the meaning of individual words. Now, there are three fundamental rules in determining the meaning of individual words. One, you must pursue the meaning intended by the author for his original hearers. Because our goal as an interpreter is to understand what the author said through the terms he has used. Two, you must establish the precise meaning of a word. And for you to do that, you must recognize the wide range of meanings that that word has. Then three, you must remember that word operates in a context and they receive their meaning from that particular context. Now, these are the methods that Brickler identified. You can study the ways words have been used in other ancient circular literature. The Septuagint, you know what the Septuagint is? That is a translation of the New Testament into Greek, as well as other biblical books, either by the same author or by other authors. Two, you need to study the synonyms of the words, that those are the words that have the same meaning with that word. And thirdly, you need to study the etymology. In other words, the origin of the word and the history of the usage of that word until it arrived at the current form. All these are important for us so that we'll be able to understand the nuances that the author of a book might be bringing up. Now, however, when you are doing etymology, you must be very careful. For example, if you look for the meaning of Esther, you will discover that if not all Bible dictionaries, they will trace the word to two different languages. Therefore, you cannot be sure what the actual root is. In etymology, the histories of words sometimes can be taken beyond the time of the author. So you must be very careful when you are doing that. And for you to know the etymology of words, you can do it through the Hebrew and the Greek languages. And these other tools can help you. Concordances. Now, especially if you have strong concordance, strong concordance do a lot of transliteration. So even if you don't understand Hebrew and Greek very well, it will be able to help you. Now, then you can make use of a lexicon. A lexicon is more or less like a dictionary, but this time there are dictionaries of the ancient languages, like the Greek lexicon, the Hebrew lexicon. Mostly they are written in English, but they will be interpreted. The words they are giving you the meaning will be written in Greek or Hebrew. Now let's look at an example here. The word battles. Added and Greeks indicated that the word was used by Aeschylus, Herodotus, the Septuagint, Philo, as well as Josephus, and it gives the meaning of the word as depth. Then we have what we call theological word books. There are so many of them, and what they do is to trace the theological meaning of the words of the Bible. There is a 10-volume book called the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. You also have a 4-volume of the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament. We call them TDNT and TDOT. Then there is a 1-volume abridged of these ones. Even if you don't read Greek or Hebrew, you can easily use the 1 volume. Now, how do you determine the words, the meaning of a word within a specific context? Now, the first step, which is the determination of the meaning of a word possesses, the second step is to determine the various meaning of the word as intended by the author. Now, I'm drawing my example here from 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1 to 5. It's written here in Greek. I'm not going to read that, but we'll take it later. But verse 2, the Greek word eketo comes up. Now, if you check the lexicon for the meaning of eketo, these are the meaning you have, hold, keep, preserve. Now, out of all this general meaning, have has been used by most translations of the Bible. Now, the question now is, did Paul use the word literally or metaphorically? Are you following me?
Yes, sir.
Many times, most pastors always interpret that word literally, and they will say that Paul is asking us to marry when he said, let every man have his wife. But in that passage, Paul did not use that word literally. He used that word metaphorically, because if you look at the first verse, the issue is that he's talking about touching a woman. Touching a woman is also a metaphor for sexual intercourse. And okay, don't worry, we'll deal with this later, because I think I have a section towards the end. Now, another thing you can do is to look at the relationship between the subject and the verb within the sentence to see the meaning. Then, two, if there is a parallelism, the use of the parallelism can help you determine the meaning of the word. Now, for example, in Hebrew parallelism, you have three forms called synonymous, antithetical, and synthetic. So, for example, Proverbs 6:16 says, there are 6 things the Lord hates, 7 which are abomination to him. So, this hate and abomination is working synonymously. Now, let us look at the antithetical here. The memory of the righteous is blessed, but the name of the wicked will rot. Righteous, wicked, blessed, rot. Now, so, and when you are reading the Bible, you must always look for the possibility of a figure of speech. Because if you translate the figure of speech literally, you will have misinterpret the passage. One of the favorite places that figures of speech are well hidden is Song of Solomon, chapter 8, verse 8, which says, we have a little sister and she has no breast. What shall we do for our sister on the day she is spoken of? Now, if you interpret she has no breast literally, then you will be speaking that the lady is malformed. But if you know the meaning of that in the culture, you will know the right interpretation of that word. All right. Let me see. Okay, I have not started practical analysis here. So later when we get to practical analysis, we will see what we are doing. Now, let me pause. What questions do you have now? I know by now you must be having questions. Hello? Are we saying that we understood everything clearly?
Sir, excuse me, sir.
Yes?
You said you send us the copy.
Oh, okay.
During last
I have not
class,
sent you. All right.
sir.
Please let somebody just remind me during the oh my
Sir,
Let somebody remind me on Monday. Monday is a public holiday. So I'm
Okay, sir.
going to be at home. All right. Do I have any?
What about Tuesday, sir?
Tuesday? No, remind me on Monday. Monday is better. You can send me a mail.
Okay,
You should have my email address. You can send me a mail. Tuesday, I will be busy.
okay, sir.
All right.
Yes, sir.
Any question?
No, sir. For now.
Okay. Let me try and move on to my. Let's move on to module 2.
Okay, sir.
Now, in module 2, we are going to get a little bit technical. Because we are going into textual issues. Oh, sorry, I've still picked module 1. All right. Don't worry. Let me pick my material here.
Okay, sir.
Just a minute, please. Just a minute. I'm trying to look for my material. Okay. Now here we are going to deal with exegesis and criticism studies. Now we are taking our introduction to textual criticism. How many of you know what textual criticism is? If you know what it is, please tell me.
It is to determine whether the text is in the original manuscript or it was added by a copyist.
All right, you have an idea, but I will not accept your definition of textual criticism. So you have an idea of what it is. Yeah, you have an idea. Okay. All right, let's just go on so that when we get here, we know what we are talking about. Now, let's begin by drawing an illustration that will be understood by you. Look at Acts chapter 8. We have the story of Ethiopian Enoch and Philip. In verse 37 of the King James Version, the Ethiopian Enoch confession says, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. If you read that same account in Revised Standard Version, the confession is not in the text. Instead, it is placed in a footnote with the remark, other ancient authorities add or all or most of verse 37. Then, King James Version also reads, for an angel went down at certain season and blah, 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 blah. This verse is also missing from Revised Standard Version and other later versions. But most people don't know all these issues because they really don't read the Bible critically. We don't read the footnotes, we just read the major text, and it is only when you begin to compare versions, passages, that you begin to know that there are issues. Now, why is the New Testament textual criticism necessary? The first reason is that the real manuscripts written by the authors themselves have not been found by anybody till today. So, what we have are copies that has been written by other people. And in fact, we don't have the second copy or the third copy. We have copies of the copies of the copies that has been copied severally. And why we don't have most of this is because the Jews have this kind of attitude that since manuscripts as, what do you call it, as sacred. So most of the time when they don't use them again, it's either they are buried or they are burnt. Apart from that, the early materials that is used to write the scripture, usually called the papyrus, is a material that wear out easily. It was around the 4th century that they started using parchment for writing the scripture. So, as a result, there is a lacuna, there is a great gap between what the authors wrote and mostly what is available in the manuscript. Now we are talking about the nature of the copies that we have now. One of the oldest surviving manuscripts of the Old Testament is a fragment of John, which is dated in the early 2nd century. You know what the early 2nd century is? Around 100 CE. Now, you will now ask, when did John write? Which manuscripts do we have? If the Gospel of John is dated around 40 or 50 CE, it means there are at least 40 to 50 years gap between what was written and the copy that we have. Are you following me?
Yes, sir.
Now, the most astounding thing is that even the copies that we have, they have a lot of variations. You have variation among copies in the original language. You have variation among the manuscripts in the translations. You have variation between ancient manuscripts in the original languages and manuscripts of the early translations. And then you have various quotations, either in the early Jewish and Christian writings. So all this makes us to be aware that there are serious issues when we talk about text of the New Testament. Then 2, because of all these various variants, let me call it, that's the technical name for we use for all these differences. We call it variants. It makes scholars to conclude that certain errors has occurred in the process of copying. A whole unit is devoted to study the type of errors that will have occurred and some of the examples. Now, what does New Testament criticism now do? The first task of New Testament critics is to gather what we call evidences and to organize the evidences. Now, what are the evidences? The evidences are the manuscripts that have been written. The many manuscripts that we have. Now, they will now begin to organize them according to what is called textual families. What do we call textual family? When they know that some manuscripts are closely related, they conclude that they belong to the same family. You will be getting more and more meaning of that as we proceed on this. Now, this module is the foundation of the New Testament that you have. So we must try to understand it. Okay. Now, After they have gathered and organized the evidences, the next step is evaluation and assessment. In other words, they try to evaluate which manuscript will have more value and more weight than the other. Then, after that, they go to the reconstruction of the history of the text. Do you know what they do here? They try to determine at what point are these changes, these errors, at what point did they come in? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
So,
sir.
when they are able to determine the point at which the variants are coming in, they will be able to establish what is likely to be what was originally written by the writer. Now, the significance of the textual criticism. First significance is that it helps us to reconstruct the New Testament text. Without textual criticism, there will not be a reliable text of the New Testament that we are having today. And if we don't have the New Testament, we can say there will be no meaningful worship in the church because there will be no text to read. They give us an idea of the history of the text. Now, textual criticism has become a scientific enterprise across decades, and it has developed our knowledge of the process through which early manuscripts of the New Testament have been preserved and transmitted. These include a fair knowledge of the date of writing, the place of origin, the peculiarity and style, particular manuscripts, and the relationship of this manuscript to other manuscripts. Now, textual criticism has a relationship with archaeology. Now, you will discover that most of these manuscripts that we have are discovered through archaeological expeditions. The most recent one is the Dead Sea Scrolls, which today is being studied and is still being studied and is giving good information for the science of textual criticism. Now, finally, I will say that textual criticism is actually the basis of good exegesis. Because if you don't have the real text, there is nothing to interpret. In other words, in the process of observing textual analysis, in the process of observing textual analysis, discover truths that can make your interpretation of the Bible very unique. For example, my study of textual analysis of the parable of the Good Samaritan made me to understand the Greek word translated, and it brought him to an inn, which can also be interpreted, and it led it to an inn. So we'll see all this analysis later. All right, so we are going to stop here, where we are just being introduced to what textual criticism is, which is a science that is aimed at reconstructing the text of the New Testament so that we will be able to have a fair, accurate text that was written by the original writers. So, I am going to stop here. If you have questions, let's bring them up. If not, we will be rounding up for today. We have 5 people in the house now. So, welcome all of you. I hope you have enjoyed your class today. All right. If there are no questions, we will see next week.